Thank you, Chairpersons. I'd like to thank the President and the Council of the College for inviting me to speak. It's a bit of a hypoglycemic time anyway, but this symposium is on a field which is slightly unconnected to endocrinology, although it transcends all other subjects. So the topic is how to integrate research into your busy schedule. And the focus of this talk is basically looking at it from a clinician's perspective, people who are busy clinicians seeing a lot of patients through the day, some of them endocrinologists, some of them non-endocrinologists. However, people who have a large workload in their clinical practice within and outside working hours, as we all know, and how research can be integrated into what you do every day, and what sort of tools and support a clinician would require in order to engage in research. Now, we all find it hard to fit in research, and most people give their clinical practice priority, and time and energy focused on research among the clinicians who work in the Ministry of Health is limited. The universities do more research because they are driven to do more research for various reasons. I'll start by outlining what sort of forces drive people to do research, as I'm focusing obviously on medical people who are involved in treating patients and how they would be motivated, what forces will drive them to do research. Now, the best reason to do research is obviously which is research enhances knowledge, and you do research to enhance the base of knowledge that we have, and therefore this would translate into better practice and better patient care. So that is the ideal reason for doing research. That is why research should be done, and especially why medical research to be done. Unfortunately, a lot of research that is done doesn't translate into practice and translate into increasing the quality of patient care. That is unfortunate, and there are various reasons for that, and they're probably because of the other forces which drive research. So it is thought that research is important, and therefore we must do research. It is good to do it, it's a good thing. Various organizations recognize research as being important. If you apply for a fellowship to a college, a royal college, they ask you how many publications you have had in the past 5 years or so. So it is considered to be something that you must do, and a good thing to do. Moving down the reasons, institutional profiles are enhanced by a high research output, particularly for universities and research institutes. If they publish a lot and they do a lot of research, then their credibility is greater, and their ability to apply for funding for various things is also greater. So you are recognized as a good academic or a good institution because you have done a lot of research. Academic credibility of an individual or of an institution is based on a high research output. So people who do a lot of research are considered to be academically higher, as opposed to the simple, humble beings who actually treat the patients. So you see this disparity particularly in Sri Lanka between the universities, which are driven to do research for various reasons, and the non-university service-oriented clinicians who actually deliver the bulk of the patient care in the country. So in a way, what we are trying to do is to bridge this gap. Now, also training programs in our country are deemed to be superior if they incorporate a component of research in their training program. So if you do an MD in this country to qualify as a consultant, you are mandated to do a research component, because it is thought that research will make that person a more rounded off individual. Unfortunately, in practice what happens is that you do research for the sake of doing it, and some very low level, poor quality research is done. It meets the low bar that is required for the training program, and somebody publishes a little booklet on it, not publishes, writes a little report on it, publishes, and it lies in an archive somewhere which nobody reads. So it doesn't get translated into actual practice, which is sad. And also remuneration is linked to research output in two ways. One is where if you depend on research grants, if you publish, you will be able to get more research funding, and the ministries and the universities also give a research allowance. So somebody has to write a little research project, and every year you submit a research project, and you get a little extra money for doing so, and the next year you write a progress report on the same thing, which probably doesn't mean anything much, and you get a little more funding. So, in other words, there are different types of research that are done. The bottom line is what most of the people do, and it is research just for the sake of doing it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, because you may do research for the sake of doing it because you love research and you enjoy doing it and it gives you an academic satisfaction. And if you focus properly, you will actually do something useful. Research purely for the sake of scientific discovery is what is called blue sky research. Means that you ask the question, why is the sky blue? And that is your research question. So, it does not really matter why the sky is blue, it is blue, and there is no real difference made if you find out whether it is caused by one mechanism or another. So, true pure scientists who do arts for art's sake or science for science sake have the luxury of doing blue sky research in developed countries. But what we as clinicians should try to focus on is to do what is called outcome driven research, which is research which will translate into clinical practice, which will benefit patient care. I think as doctors who treat patients, that must be our primary goal. So, as scientists, we need blue sky research. In a developing country, limited funds, limited resources, limited people to do things, limited time, there is a great need to prioritize your research and make sure that what you do has an outcome in terms of patient care. I strongly believe in that, and the idea of this talk is to motivate people into bridging the gap between wanting to do some research because you like it, or because you are mandated to do it, or because you have been forced to do it for other reasons, but try to do something which is of benefit to the community, which will translate at least in a tiny little way to the quality of patient care. How are we doing as a country in terms of research? Now, over the years, the number of publications in indexed medical journals, indexed medical and science journals, has been increasing. People are motivated more and more to publish. Publication numbers are just one index of the output of research by an individual or in a country. So, you might say we are doing well because we are increasing. In 2016, kind of reasonable number of publications have come out in the country, but again it is a small share of the world number of publications, probably less than 1%. Actual figures are about 0.05%. But if you look at disciplines, medicine, if you look at medicine and immunology and microbiology and biochemistry, they are all parts of medicine. So, medicine is one of the biggest fields for research in this country. So, the bulk of the research done in this country is actually medicine related, which is a very positive thing. And if you include overall, even globally, it is science and medicine which leads research. But if you look at again publication output, most of the time it's the universities which do a lot of research, and the University of Colombo has the highest research output in medicine in number of publications. Peradeniya has the highest overall number, but that's because it has a multitude of different disciplines of faculties. And if you look at the non-university groups, the government hospitals, that's the sort of numbers. You will find that the number of publications is about half the number of publications emanating from the universities. Publication numbers don't mean much, because publication numbers don't indicate quality or impact, but still publication numbers are a good thing. If you have good publication numbers, it means that some work is being done. The thing we have got to understand is that most of the Ministry of Health and government hospitals research is linked to research done in the universities. They are collaborative projects which are done with the participation of the ministry. So, the actual numbers where people who are non-academics, who are in clinical practice, how much research they independently do is not clearly known, because you can't judge from the number of publications what they are actually doing. But still, lots of people are interested in research, and if you look at our actual output, we have in the last 5 years 7,900 papers, 8,900 authors. The citation count is the number of times these papers have been cited, pretty good. And the citations for publication is 8.2. The last figure is very important because a field weighted citation impact is the average number of citations that a paper gets in a related field. If you look at medicine and you look at Sri Lanka, we are 1.5. So, we are 50%, 55% citations more than the world average. So, we are not doing too badly. In other words, what it does mean is that the publications that come out from Sri Lanka are actually quite good for a country which is a developing country, now upper middle income country recently, and with very limited resources, very few people actually being able to engage full time in hardcore research, which is different from the West, where there are a lot of research professors and people, research scientists who are doing research all the time. So, we are not doing too badly. We could do better, and the publications, 23.8% of our publications are actually in the top 10 journals of the world in each field. If you look at the top 10 journals by each field, not the global top 10, but the top 10 journals by each discipline. So, tropical medicine, endocrinology, nephrology, etc. Not doing too badly overall. So, why do clinicians find it hard to do research? It's because if you haven't been trained formally in research, you come across these horrible things that you know nothing about. Like people talk about ethics review. You can't do a study without ethics review, without registering a trial in a trial registry. There are all sorts of statements which are thrown at you by the journal saying, send us a PRISMA statement, have you followed the consort guidelines? And we are not formally trained. Well, I am formally trained, but lots of us are clinicians. I speak for the clinician body as a whole. We don't get enough formal training. There's a little bit of community medicine training when you're an undergraduate, but that's about it. And then there are all these fancy looking charts and graphs and documents, and it's difficult. So, most of us are unfamiliar with research methodology. We do not know, if we have a question to answer, how we then analyze that question and research into that question. Then we are unfamiliar with the tools required for research, the basic tools. And we have problems in doing multidisciplinary research for two reasons. One is that people don't talk to each other very much when they are doing research. The people who have the time and the funding to do research generally don't involve in clinical research much, because most of them are involved in community based research, and a large amount of research in this country is public health based, which is a good thing, but there is not enough clinical research because there is not much interdisciplinary work going on between the clinicians and scientists who are in the research institutes. It can be done, but it's not happening all the time. Then there is this problem of control and false governance, where if somebody tries an innovative research project, there are 100 people to shoot him down and say that's a useless study, it's not going to work, it's already published. And I'll give you an example. Some time ago, a colleague of mine tried to start a project on looking at steroids, the benefit of steroids in dengue, and he was shot down by all sorts of experts who claim to be experts. If you look at those experts' profiles, they haven't actually done much research, but they said, no, this is all done, there is nothing to find, it's all proven, why do you want to waste money on this? And it never got funding, that project, when in reality there was no solid evidence in proper randomized controlled trials on the subject ever, which is proven by a systematic review. So, pseudo experts and self-proclaimed experts tend to control what people do, and you have a young enthusiastic physician who is somewhere in a periphery who sees a clinical problem and wants to research on it, and is very quickly shot down and told, you don't know how to do it, you can't do it, you don't have the resources, and that poor chap gets then disgruntled and ends up doing his clinical practice, which he is good at, and after a few years he finds that he hasn't been in the research program and he can't do anything much. Then we have the problem of funds, which is seen to be difficult. I want to do some research, where is the money? There is no funding. I don't have enough of a research profile to apply for funding. So, it's a negative loop which you engage in. You haven't done much work, you don't have enough funding you can't apply for funding, because the funding agencies look at your profile and say, you haven't published any papers, why should we give you the funding, you are not going to utilize it. So, lots of obstacles like that which make the clinician hesitant and wary of doing research. Then we have very little research management support, and most importantly we have very little time, because time is the most precious commodity for a clinician, especially in this country where you are overloaded with large numbers of patients and large workload. There is very little time to sit and focus. You come home at the end of the day, you are too tired to be writing research proposals. But clinicians should do research, because clinicians are the ones who really know what the important questions are, because it's not about the right answers, it's about the questions, asking the right questions. So, it's clinicians who should lead research in terms of patient care in this country, and they also have access to a huge resource of clinical material which goes unutilized. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are the areas which are commonly relevant to patient care. You have clinical research where you look at outcomes and how certain strategies and interventions influence the progression of disease. Then you have drug development of investigations, which is closely related to basic sciences research. And then of course you have outcomes audit, health systems research and community research. For clinicians, it is really these things which people should be focusing on, because that is where they have access to the patients and to the patient care. In terms of timelines, clinical research has a fairly short period where you have got to work on something, and it is possible for a clinician to do reasonably good quality research within a short period of time. These other things take longer. Drug development is a long process. Basic sciences research is a stepwise thing where groups produce little building blocks which eventually lead to some big finding. And then there is outcomes and service improvement research, which is easy to do and which feeds back on itself and then drives the improvement of patient care. So, if you look at this graph, these are a few things that we can do, but particularly I would like you to focus on the ones in red, where rapid early diagnostic methods, prediction of disease progression, risk factor identification, and specific therapies and critical interventions. These are the areas which should be driven by the clinicians, and which, if you look at, can actually be integrated into your day-to-day medical practice. So, study design is obviously a key, and a good understanding of study design is essential for all clinical doctors, because there is no point in writing up research towards the red end of the spectrum. Low level stuff like case reports, I would not waste time on them, they do not add to the base of medical knowledge. But go towards the green end of the spectrum, experimental research like control trials, difficult to do, needs a lot of funding. But then there are the observational analytical, the cohort studies and the case control studies, which are useful ways to answer a lot of clinical questions. So, ladies and gentlemen, we should focus when we can on doing these studies in our practice, because they are all within reach, and those are the levels of evidence, and the meta-analysis, which is considered a high form of evidence, can be generated from this kind of evidence. So, researchers should try as far as possible to avoid going into the red and staying in the green and doing analytical studies or interventional studies which are of benefit, and these all can be done if you have the motivation and plan them correctly. Now, just a few tips on how to overcome some of the obstacles. Statistics is a frightening thing, and it is made more frightening by the people who teach it, who manage to make it more complicated than it actually is. So, what I have found in practice is that go for some basic books, and these two are excellent books which give you a grounding in basics and clinical statistics, and all you need to know is look at your study, and if you go through these books, there are numerous examples which guide you on how to analyze your data and how to plan your study correctly. So, get familiar with these books and with the subject matter. Then there are certain useful tools which any researcher should have. Obviously, a good statistical software package. SPSS is the famous one. We all know about it, but we do not really know how to harness its power. because it is also something which has a fairly steep learning curve, and also it's not available freely because it's a licensed product. Then you have various other things like sigma plot, which enable you to make nice graphs and present your data. And don't forget that Excel, Microsoft Excel, the new version, if you have a licensed version, it has the analysis tool pack as a free add-on, which you just need to activate, which gives you all the statistical analytical packages built into Microsoft Excel. Then use a reference manager. A reference manager is a software which collates your references, the articles that you want to discuss, and enables you to put them into Word documents in the order you want. So there are two. There is EndNote, which is a subscribed version, which is expensive, and there is Mendeley, which is free. And I've just got a screenshot of Mendeley, where you can get all your things categorized and your own stuff can be held in a database. So Mendeley is free, open access, and can be used by anyone. Then I strongly motivate people to do systematic reviews. It's the highest form of evidence, and if you do it properly, it's a good publication. It doesn't need any direct patient data, so it can be done in the comfort of your home if you have the right approach and the right tools. And RevMan is published by the Cochrane database, and RevMan is free of charge to those who register. Even if you don't do a Cochrane review, it is free of charge. And then there is Covidence, which also trial versions and limited access versions are available free. These are for producing systematic reviews and doing those meta-analytical plots that people find very interesting to look at. So this is Mendeley. When you publish a paper nowadays, people are very strict. Journals are becoming more and more strict. And when you publish something, they ask you, have you reported this data in the format that we want? And there are guidelines for the reporting of all these trials. And ladies and gentlemen, I draw your attention to the Equator Network website, which has collated all the different guidelines on reporting all kinds of studies. Even a case report, there is a format, the CARE format for reporting the case. Very useful website, all the details are there. So when you start your study, if you plan it in accordance with these guidelines, it becomes very easy to publish, because I think the speaker after me is going to speak on how to get your paper published in a high impact journal. And this is something, it is planning at the early stage, which will enable you to get your paper published in a good journal. Teams. Build links with teams. If a paper has a single author, it's probably not a good paper, because a single author cannot do proper research. The larger the number of team members you have, although it may appear to dilute the value of the paper, actually gives a paper strength. So build up teams with university academics, other hospitals, research institutes, overseas collaborators, lots of people who are waiting to do some research, because we hold the key, we hold the clinical material. There is no other country other than Sri Lanka which has data on, let us say, oleander poisoning. Snake bite, this is a country which has the biggest resource on snake bite. So we hold the keys, we hold the material, and there will be, it's something you can sell to collaborators and say, come and do some research with me because I have the clinical material. Then those of us who have the luxury of having junior doctors working with us or research students, they are there, and they are always eager to do some research and get a couple of publications and rope them in, give them the guidance, and you will be able to do some quality work. Funding is thought to be difficult, but it's not as difficult as you think. There's plenty of funding opportunities in the country. There's enough money to do anything. Just being able to have the right team put together and apply for a grant and get it. And you have, most clinical research can be done with very, very minimal funding. Then there is the industry, which supports drug trials and stuff. Grants from the colleges. I'm not sure about the Endocrine College, but I know that the CCP has some grants. Then the National Science Foundation, the NRC, and universities provide grants. So build up links with the research institutes, and people will be able to apply for grants which provide sufficient funding. Our biggest challenge is time, as I said, and we are all the time trying to bend time to fit ourselves, wrap ourselves around the clock. But it's a difficult thing to do And the only advice I can give you is find the time. You have to think that a clinician becomes whole only when he has a reasonable research profile. And it is nice to say I have done some research. It gives you academic credibility, it gives you a sense of fulfillment which is greater than what you achieve only by looking after patients. So, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, find the time. It does not take a lot of it to do research. Motivation is important. Most of us are afraid. We think we can't do it. We've not been doing it for such a long time. We just can't get on the bandwagon now. But don't feel that way. You must have confidence in yourself and not be discouraged by those who say, this is a silly study, it's not worth doing it. Don't be discouraged. Arm yourself with the tools and the training, and any individual can do good quality research. Collaborate, build teams together, and then automatically each person will further their research ability. Find funds, and don't forget to disseminate your findings, because a study which is not known to the people is not worth doing at all. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.